Welcome to the Emisarios Unidos de Luz channel. If you enjoy this near-death experience story, consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Now let's start with the story. As a holistic therapist, my life was okay, but deep down, I was deeply dissatisfied with it. I had always done my very best to be a loving and kind husband, yet everything I did seemed to result in someone suffering. I felt dejected and lost, and in my despair, I fell into a deep depression. I would sob for hours while praying to God to relieve me of my suffering. I beseeched God to show me a better way to live, and soon after, my life fell apart. My wife and I separated, and I was so depressed that I was contemplating suicide. Without a home, I arranged to rent a room, but at the last moment, that arrangement fell through. With nowhere else to go and very little money, I ended up staying with a friend who was kind enough to provide me with a place to stay. Financially, I was ruined, and when I reflected on my life, it was disconcerting to me the contrast between my life at that moment and the life I had planned for myself, and the disparity triggered a deep pain in my heart. With no recourse, I realized that the only thing that remained for me to do was to calm my mind, accept my life, and completely surrender my entire existence to God. My friend with whom I was staying had an extensive library in her home, and from her library, she invited me to choose a book to read. I settled on a book called the Yeshua Letters, as I felt drawn to read that book. Let the words in this book speak directly to you, the book's introduction read, and as I read the book, it felt as though the book was written for me. The book was written with a directness that I had never experienced in any of the many books that I had previously read, and the events spoken about in the book seemed to be very similar to the events of my own life. Taking the advice of my Reiki teacher, I began to practice meditation, and it was through the regular practice of meditation that my body and mind began to feel enlivened, and I would experience a profound peace. I began to awaken at 3 a.m. as if by the force of a benevolent presence, a presence that was urging me to meditate in the silence and darkness of the very early morning. Over time, I became increasingly aware of what indeed was a tender, compassionate, and loving presence, and I would become aware of that loving presence whenever I meditated. The love that the presence emanated was so powerful that it healed my heart completely and restored peace to my mind and heart. Through meditation, I had entered a sacred space of such profound peace and focus that when my heart stopped beating one morning during meditation, I remained calm and unperturbed. It was not long after that I found myself watching my body from a position above it and from a zone of utter peace. The sense of peace I experienced in that realm I recognized as the same loving presence that I would become aware of when I meditated, the presence I have come to refer to as the presence of Yeshua or Christ. I experienced Yeshua as a light that I could feel radiating everywhere, and as that light approached me slowly, I could feel the absolute magnificence of its presence. I also became aware that that presence was an essence familiar to me since before the beginning of time, and I knew that it knew everything about me and that it in fact knew everything about everything. "Do you really want to die?" Yeshua asked. "I just want to go home," I replied sincerely. I then felt a tug to my right, and as I turned, I saw Christ as a boundless, limitless, radiant, powerful, divine, and eternal light essence coming through an immense golden portal, surrounded by infinity. I knew instantly that I was beholding the portal beyond which there was no return, the portal to heaven. Christ was on the other side of the portal, and I could feel him beckoning me to enter through the portal. I suddenly and swiftly moved to the other side of the portal. Passing through the portal was the most exhilarating aspect of the entire experience because I knew at that moment that I had passed through death's door and was still alive. I knew I was immortal and that death was nothing but a grand illusion. The complete expansiveness and utter joy I felt at that moment cannot be described in words. The human I used to be was dead, but I felt more alive than ever. It was as if one never existed and that the earth and the universe never existed. It became apparent that all that is temporal is an illusion. The whole of heaven was loudly celebrating and rejoicing my arrival back home, and I could hear heavenly bells, trumpets, angelic choirs, laughter, and all manner of celebration. People celebrated my return, but they also celebrated the boundless happiness and joy intrinsic to their essence in the realm of limitless and unending love and joy, and in heaven I could feel that all-encompassing, unconditional love of God. Is all this love for me? What have I done to deserve such special treatment? I'm just a guy who grew up in a middle-class family, and I have no significant achievements or accolades, I thought to myself. It was at that moment that I was instantly overwhelmed by unconditional love, and it was through the infusion of that love that I realized that eternal, boundless, and unconditional love is all that truly exists. I understood, without it being explicitly communicated, that I had a choice to either return to the same body or that I could reincarnate. In its spirit or essential form, I thought very pragmatically about my options. It made sense to me to return to the same body in order to complete my mission on Earth, as to take a different body meant that I would have to build a personality and a psychological, physical, and emotional state and framework all over again when the existing body was already prepared with the psychological and physical prerequisites needed to complete what remained of my earthly mission. The recreation of a similar framework would have meant that I would have had to experience the pain and suffering that I had experienced up until that point in my life once again, albeit in a different body, when the existing body was still able to complete the soul's purpose of liberating the mind from the fear of death, the fear at the very core of all fears. In my form as a spirit, I knew that it was for the purpose of transcending the fear of death that souls choose to incarnate on earth. I knew that in our purest or essential form, we are divine and eternal beings, and that divine love is our very nature. I learned that it is only a tiny aspect of the infinite mind, perceiving life through the veil of separation, which associates with an earthly form to give it life, but it is our belief in separation from God or from oneness that is the root of all fears. Before returning from heaven to life on earth, I remember how I used archetypes and patterns to draw the plan for my present and future life experiences, a life plan that was built upon the experiences that I had already lived in my body. As I constructed my life plan, it occurred to me that I had chosen my family, personality, gender, mindset, nationality, and even the moment in history to be incarnated in order to learn the very specific lessons and experiences my soul desired to learn. As incredible as it may seem, it was communicated to me that every single thought, emotion, feeling, sensation, choice, and outcome, absolutely everything, including those things that I wasn't consciously aware of, were all planned. I also understood that all of our life experiences actually occur in a single holy moment, but in the realm of time and space, as we experience it on earth, we experience our life as a succession of moments. Because I was so eager to free my mind from the illusion of separation during my earthly existence, I constructed the blueprint of my future experience with difficult life lessons. I wanted to return to earth in the same body because, in the great divine cosmic plan, to be alive on earth at this time bestows upon one a unique opportunity to free one's mind and soul as we enter a new cosmic cycle. During my experience of heaven, I was awakened to the fact that those who suffer learn valuable lessons, as do we as a collective, since in truth, we are all connected. In consideration of our interconnectedness, the blueprint I constructed for my future included those experiences, choices, thoughts, feelings, and actions that consider the elevation of not only my consciousness as an individual but also the consciousness of the collective. Upon completion of my life plan, I sensed a presence to my right. "It is a heavy load that you have set for yourself," he said to me. "I will remember that it is all an illusion," I replied. The being, who was a specialist in life blueprint construction, communicated his concern for the amount of life work I had given myself, and in the communication of his heartfelt concern, our interconnectedness or oneness was very palpable to me. Suddenly, I felt a terrible pull downward, and I began to separate from the experience of peace, love, and oneness that I experienced in heaven. I began to feel that familiar loneliness once again. I felt as if I was in the eye of a furious whirlwind spinning as I returned to my body. It was a very sudden, harsh, and noisy return. I was sad to be away from the experience of love and of oneness, but the memory of all that I experienced in heaven helped me readjust to life in my body. For the following weeks, I felt as if I were between two worlds, and during those weeks I experienced a spiritual transformation that was guided by a higher force, such that any question that came to mind was instantly answered. My mind was quiet in those weeks, which made communication with the heavenly realm much easier. In those weeks, wild animals surrounded me and loved being around me. I knew that those animals were God's messengers, reminding me of how loved I am and reminding me that I am never alone. I saw how the world is constructed with the same symbols I used to build the blueprint of my life, and I recognized holiness in myself, in everything, and in everyone. I received spontaneous healings for hunger, bodily pain, or when I felt cold or exhausted. All I had to do was ask, and I would feel fresh and strong once again. Unlike that person who I was before my NDE, that person who felt that they would only cause others harm, after my return from heaven, I was able to heal others with prayer alone. Suffice to say that upon my return from heaven, I was a very different person, and for the first time in my life, I felt as though I was completely awake. Everything subsequently seemed perfect and pure, although at times it felt as though I was fighting that purity. Because I couldn't reconcile the disparity between the person I was and the person I had become, I decided to visit my spiritual teacher. On my way to the temple to see him, I found a fake orange by the curb and was guided to carry it with me. When I arrived at the temple, I presented the orange to my spiritual teacher as an offering, since I had nothing else to offer him. When he held it in his hand, he started laughing loudly and told me that was a most wonderful omen. It was a representation of the perfection of wisdom, and he kindly advised me to keep resting in the innermost nature of my mind and to come back to see him for further guidance. Slowly, the perfect state started to dissipate, and the more difficult challenges that I planned for myself to learn from began to occur. It was during one of those trying times that Yeshua appeared to me once again. As the room was filled with his presence, I felt a jolt of electricity travel down my leg. "Would you seek God and nothing but God?" Yeshua asked. "Yes," I replied enthusiastically, and once again, I felt the jolt of electricity travel down my leg. "Would you accept Christ as your only identity? Would you bring everyone to heaven with you?" Yeshua asked. "Yes," I replied enthusiastically. Immediately, I saw the numbers 365 flashing in deep blue and gold on my forehead before his presence dissolved, and I concluded from that vision that I had a full year to fulfill my promise. As the year progressed, however, I realized how difficult it was for me to do. A whole year went by, and I thought I had failed miserably. Now I was in real trouble. I had the most sublime of all possible experiences a human being could possibly hope to experience, offered to me purely by the grace of God, yet I felt as if I was distancing myself further and further away from what I desired to do. As the fear of miserably betraying God, Yeshua, myself, and everything I held dear and sacred became more and more intense, my mother came to visit me from Argentina for my birthday. On February 8th of the year 2000, she gave me the gift of a golden cross with a star, where you'd normally see a crucified body hanging. That visit was the very last time my mother and I saw each other. That same day, my girlfriend at the time gave me a book. She apologized in advance, saying that she had never seen that book before, but it felt right to buy it for me. The book was called A Course in Miracles, and prior to that day, I had seen it only once at a bookstore. At the time, however, I decided that that book wasn't for me. On the cover of the book was a star identical to the star on the cross my mother gave me. When I opened the book, I saw the number 365, as I had seen in my vision. That's when it dawned on me what Yeshua's plan truly was. The Course in Miracles book comes with 365 workbook lessons, one for each day of the year. It was by practicing the lessons of forgiveness that I had the opportunity to fulfill my 3 promises. The book is renowned for having been written by a woman who was said to have heard and transcribed a voice who spoke to her and who identified itself as Jesus of Nazareth. The book and the lessons are a practice in mind training to teach oneself how fearful thoughts can be forgiven and replaced by loving thoughts instead. The lessons of that book were very applicable to and corresponded with my life as I experienced it before and after my NDE, and I found its advice incredibly helpful. I have experienced many serendipities, mystical experiences, and unexplainable miracles subsequent to my NDE, and I believe those divinely inspired synchronicities have helped me get past my most difficult times. Since my NDE, I find myself able to get through the most difficult periods of my life more easily than before, and as I communicate with the heavenly realm, I am reminded how these seemingly harsh experiences are mere illusions, that they are just lessons I gave myself to learn from and nothing more, and I can thank God that that's all they are.